Today we're going to look at how easy it is to get a website up and running in Windows Azure Websites and use that as the backend for a mobile application. We'll start by creating a new website in Windows Azure Websites, and we'll then deploy to that website using Git. Lastly, we'll look at connecting to that website from our mobile application. In this specific scenario, we'll be generating a URL shortener where the mobile client allows you to view all of the URLs that have been shortened in addition to adding new ones. If you'd prefer a documented web walkthrough of what the screencast will cover, you can find it at this bit.ly link. To start off with, you're going to need a Windows Azure account. If you don't already have one, you can get a free trial by going to www.windowsazure.com. Once you do that, you can get to the management portal by going to manage.windowsazure.com. The portal's been redesigned recently and is all written in HTML5 and works great on different browsers and different operating systems. So the first thing we're going to do once we are in the portal is go to New and create a new website. Our website is going to use MySQL to be our data store, so we're going to create a new website with a database. Here we're just going to say what our URL should be, so let's call this URL Shortener test. Since we want a new database, here we're going to use a new MySQL database, and we're just going to choose the East US region. Here you can choose to name your MySQL database if you want. We're going to go ahead and change that to URL Shortener test, and we'll agree to the terms of service. Once that's done, we can click the check mark, and as you can see down here, it is generating our new website. This will only take a few seconds, and there you go. We've gotten the notification that the website was created successfully. Now that the website is generated, we can click onto it here, and we are taken to a dashboard where we get some information about the site, including a few bits of analytics, some options for deployment over here on the right side, the status, a few other information specific to our subscription, and then the linked resource, which is our MySQL database. If we want to get to the connection string for our MySQL database, we can go over here to the Configure tab, scroll down, and we'll see our connection string right here. One important thing to note is that when we set up this Windows Azure website, as you can see right here, not only is it set up to be running .NET 4.0, but it's also capable of running PHP version 5.3. Today's website will be using PHP specifically, so we're not actually going to touch .NET at all. Once you've gotten your connection string from the configuration tab in the Windows Azure website portal, you can use the MySQL Workbench or the MySQL command line tools to connect to that database, and we are just going to insert a single table. All that table is going to do is keep track of our URLs. We'll have an ID, the name, the full URL, and a create date. The name will actually be what we use for the shortened URL, and then the full URL is, of course, will be the actual full website that the shortened URL goes to. So to generate that table, it's currently in our database, so if we refresh now, we'll see that table there, and we're ready to set up our website and push it out. Let's go ahead and look at how to do that.
The next thing we're going to do is pull down the source code for our website. The source code for this PHP website is hosted in GitHub under the Windows Azure Samples organization in the URL Shortener PHP repository. The source code is nearly complete. At this point, once we pull it down, we just need to configure it to use our MySQL database and download and install the third-party libraries. Let's start by pulling this down from Git. So here, we've cloned a repository, so now we have it locally. Now, if you look at the directory structure inside of there, you'll notice that we have a source folder that actually contains all of our source code. Since we don't want to push up the README and the notice and the license file, what we're actually going to do is copy the files out of that source folder and put them in a new directory that we'll use to push to Windows Azure. Now, we've got everything that we need, just the code file specifically, in our URL Shortener test directory. Let's go back to the portal. And if you go to the dashboard, you'll see under the quick links there's a setup Git publishing link. Let's go ahead and click on that. It'll take a second as it sets up our repository hosted in Windows Azure for us to push our code to. Basically what this does is that whenever we push to our repository in Azure, it's going to deploy our site for us. So as soon as this is done, which should be momentarily, we'll copy that locally and start using it. Okay, now that that's done, we'll see that we have a Git repository that's ready in Windows Azure. We already have Git installed. All we need to do now is actually set up a local Git repository. So let's follow this part here in step 2. So we've initialized a local Git repository. Let's add all our files. We'll do our initial commit, which adds all the files. Now let's go to step 3. Here we need to add a remote branch for Azure so that when we push that, it pushes out to Windows Azure. Now, if you haven't set this up before, one thing you may need to do is set your deployment credentials. Let's go ahead and click on that, and I'll reset my password so you can see what it looks like. So here, you get a username and password that you can set for Git and FTP publishing. Once that's done, let's go ahead and go back to the terminal. And we pushed out locally. Now, if you go back to the portal, you'll see that it switched over from being those Git instructions to seeing our deployment history. So this is basically saying that I pushed a Git and it deployed this commit. Now, if we go to browse it right now, we'll see that the site doesn't work. The reason the site doesn't work is that it's depending on third-party libraries that we have yet to actually install. Let's go ahead and do that next. Now, if we return to GitHub and look at the URL Shortener repository, if we go down and look at the README, you'll see that there are 2 third-party resources we need to pull out and install into our source code directory. The first is going to be Silex, which is a micro PHP framework. Let's go ahead and click here so we can download that. We're going to use the FAR version of the file. We'll just download that locally. And then let's go back to the repo, and the next thing we need to download is Twig. Twig is a templating engine just so we can quickly display a little bit of a UI. Alright, let's go to our directories now. So, in the root directory for our URL shortener, let's say a new folder called vendor. And then inside of that, we'll create a folder named Silex. Inside that Silex folder, we'll copy over the FAR file. And then we'll create a new folder named Twig. And inside that Twig folder, inside that Twig folder, we'll put all the files for Twig. So now we should be able to add these files to our repository, push them out to Azure, and the site should work. So let's return to the terminal, check the status. So as you can see, the vendor folder is brand new and hasn't been added yet. So we'll add that. Commit all those files. And we'll push them up to the server. There's a fair number of files there, so it might take just a second. Alright, everything's been deployed. Let's go back to our portal. Now, as you can see again, it's already been updated without us having to refresh or do anything like that. It shows that we've deployed our third-party libs. So let's go ahead and refresh our website. And now that we've refreshed, we'll see that we actually get a little bit of a UI here, a displayed web page. It's just giving you an intro to what the service does. That's just a URL shortener. We can go ahead and click on this link, but we're going to run into a problem, and that is that there's no, we're not connected to any database. We haven't configured the source code to connect. So we'll go ahead and do that next, and then our site should be good to go. So the first thing we're going to do is go back into the portal and go to the configure tab. And here we have the connection string for our database. Let's go ahead and open up. If you go into the source code, the source folder of the code we deployed, we'll go to the Kepin folder, and then inside there we're going to go to URL shortener.php. This is where all the logic is at for our URL shortener. And as you can see here, the configuration right now has it pointing to a local database, which we don't have set up. Instead, we are going to point to the one we put into Windows Azure. So let's go ahead and copy database name, our data source, our username, and our password. We'll save that file, and now we'll go back to the terminal. We'll see that that file has been changed, so we'll add that. And we'll go ahead and push that out to Azure. Now once that's done, what we should see when we go back to our site is we can click on that URL and we won't get any sort of error. So let's go ahead and try that out. Site's up and running, everything should be fine. And great, we don't get an error. Of course we don't get any information. So let's see how we can quickly test this out by adding a new URL to our own system. So fortunately, there's an easy way that we can add a new URL just using a web browser. Let's go back to the source code and look and figure out exactly how we want to do that. If we go back and open up the app.php file, this actually contains all the routes that handle what happens when you go to the website. So if we go down, we see this method right here. So this says is that if you go to our website with the add at the end, and then you pass in these parameters, we can add a new URL. So let's try that out. So the first one is the key, which the key right now is just specified at the top of this file as text my_key. In theory, what you'd want to do is change that to be something custom so that other people couldn't just add things to your site, your URL shortening list whenever you wanted them to, whenever they wanted to. Last thing is URL slug. So let's say we want to do MS for Microsoft. Let's go, and then we look at this and say it also wants a query string parameter named URL, which is the full URL. So alright, great. We added a new URL. So if we click on this, okay, so right now the site's set to just display the full URL when you go to the shortened one, instead of actually rendering the site. If you look at the code, there's a line that's commented out, and it specifically says if you want to display the actual site, uncomment this and comment the line before that just echoes out the full URL. So right now, again, just because we're testing, we're not actually going to go to the site, we'll just see the URL. So now if we go back to our list and refresh, we've got a shortened URL. That's all you need to do to get this set up so that you can add new URLs and view them and then send them to other people, and they'll be shortened and ready to go. Up next, in another video, we'll look at actually creating a mobile client to connect to this website and view those shortened URLs and then add new ones directly from the mobile client.